Hello, Thursday's World Economic News. Opening chart, all things being well, is the US bucks the global trend this month. This is the PMI surveys again that seem to be the least we can say they track what's going on with the economy. But the idea is that they're meant to actually predict what's going on. And you can see the dip down and it's come up. But the trend is down. There's no great more recovery. The line going across at 50 is the line for PMIs that if it's above 50, it's expansion. If it's below 50, it's contraction. And you can see that 6 months ago, things were looking quite well up about 60, which is showing a reasonable amount of expansion. But everyone's coming down now. It says the America bucks the trend. As you can see, the purple one, the one that's at the top, has kicked up strangely at the end. But the rest, the Eurozone has been coming down for 3 months. The UK in yellow has been coming down for 6 months. China's been trending down for six months. And Japan is having a bad time of it all. But they all seem to be clumping around just over 50. And that means just about expanding. Moving on to the New Republic and Ron Paul's surprisingly lucid solution to the debt ceiling impasse. Representative Ron Paul has hit upon a remarkably creative way to deal with the impasse over the debt ceiling. Have the Federal Reserve Board destroy the $1.6 trillion in government bonds it now holds. While at first blush this idea might seem crazy, on more careful thought it is actually a very reasonable way to deal with the crisis. Furthermore, it provides a way to have lasting savings to the budget. Now, I'll just ask the question. You can read the article, see what he's on about, and try and work it out for yourselves. In the article we get, this means that if Congress told the Fed to burn the bonds, it would in fact just be destroying a liability that the government had to itself, but it would still reduce the debt subject to the debt ceiling by $1.6 trillion. This would buy the country considerable breathing room before the debt ceiling had to be raised again. President Obama and the Republican congressional leaders could have close to 2 years to talk about potential spending cuts or tax increases. Maybe they could even talk a little about jobs. Now, it's silly for me to actually ask you to work that out for yourself, but it's an interesting thing to go on the internet and see what experts have to say about it. Talking of jobs, these are some statistics for the United States, employment statistics in thousands or percent. So total non-farm payroll is down 7 million jobs. That is from December 07. 07 to May 11, it's down 7 million jobs. Part-time for economic reasons is increased by 4 million. And they're all interesting, but I've just underlined these three. The bottom one being unemployed for 27 weeks or over has now increased by 5 million people have been unemployed for 27 weeks or over. Just a headline to read here. Analysis: stimulus ends. State healthcare is on life support. Part of the stimulus package was giving money to the states to help them with things like healthcare. That is being withdrawn, and the states have to deal with that sort of thing on their own. The China Post gives us the US Fed set to extend emergency liquidity facility for the ECB and the BOE, that's the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England. The US Federal Reserve said Wednesday it was extending its emergency liquidity facility for its leading Western counterparts as Europe's sovereign debt crisis continues to fester. The US Central Bank said its existing temporary US dollar liquidity swap arrangements with the ECB and the BOE and the Swiss National Bank and the Bank of Canada would be extended for 1 more year. The standby facility allows the foreign central banks to borrow US dollars to lend to their own commercial banks to shore up their own short-term liquidity. Moving on to the Financial Times, Brazil risks tumbling from boom to bust. The first one in BRICS, B for BRICS, is Brazil. Back in February, in an earlier Insight column, we highlighted the major build-up of consumer debt at extremely high rates of interest, putting a significant cash flow burden on the repayment capacity of borrowers in Brazil. Since then, the situation has deteriorated further. Pressures are building in the Brazilian credit cycle. And from the centre of the article I bring out, in short, the cash flow burden is astronomical and is rising. We calculate that the debt service burden, we talked to this yesterday, of the so-called middle class in Brazil has now breached 50% of disposable income. 50% of disposable income going on debt servicing, as high income earners have little need to borrow at rates which are punitive, and most consumer credit is therefore being directed to the middle class for consumption, like pigs to the slaughter. And why doesn't this not work? Okay, that works now. Bloomberg, Japan pledges to double sales tax by the middle of this decade. Japan still struggling with its decades of loss. Say, well, by the middle of this decade we should be able to put taxes up. That would be about 25 years after the start of the problems. FT Alphaville gives us Italian wobbles del giorno. It's just one day, but Tuesday ended in very poor fashion for Italy's government bonds. The 10-year benchmark bond yield has breached 5% at pixel time. Going through 5% seems to be a psychological barrier. Later in that article we get PMIs again, where we started. Germany and France linked together, we can see the last 6 months turning down, and that 0 line would be the equivalent of the 50 line. Anything above 0 is expansion. We can see Spain and Ireland are struggling below the line, struggling to get above it but failing. But Italy has taken in the last 3 months from just about positive and expansion to a horrible little turn down into negative territory. And Italy does not need to do things like that. Don't scare the horses. From The Economist we get this one, spot the pattern, and this is Greek 10-year bond yields, and as it points out, 3 spikes there. It spiked up before May and dropped down, and then went to a bigger spike and dropped down, and then went to a bigger spike, and now it's dropped down again. And the question is, have the European Central Bank, the Eurozone, and the I was about to say the CIA, can't even remember the name, IMF, have they sorted it so the next spike will not be bigger than the last spike? Finish with UPI.com, and Saudi prince proposes oil war with Iran. A very strange article, underlining the escalating Cold War between Saudi Arabia and its rival Iran. Former intelligence chief Prince Turki Al-Faisal proposes that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia uses its oil power to drive down prices to batter the Islamic Republic's sanctions-hit economy. In other words, Saudi Arabia should pump more oil, release 4 million barrels, he recommends, that is their reserve capacity, and drive down the price so Iran really takes it in the pants. Oh dear. Thanks. Bye.